In part 1, we talked about how the gods of Westeros and Essos are not real, and as they are not real, cannot be the source of magic in the series. George R. R. Martin himself talks about how the gods in this universe serve a more symbolic and thematic function than a literal one.
Other than that, it works on a more, thematic and symbolic function than a literal one.
This means that the gods themselves are not real, but people's belief in them is, and obviously drives the story in significant ways. An analogy I've come to use since I made Magic Part 1 is that of Lord of the Rings. In Lord of the Rings, no one asks what gods do the elves worship that give them these magical abilities. It is simply accepted that magic exists in that world and that elves are magical creatures. The same is true in A Song of Ice and Fire, but the author added the aspect of religion, since religion exists in the real world, and would affect someone's view of working magic.
Is that in most fantasies, you have working magic. You have magic that demonstrably works, which would affect the religious feelings of many people,
People in this world use religion to justify the existence of magic, but they don't believe in the gods and then gain magic powers. They see the magic and then believe the gods to be true. This is something Martin brings up in my last video in relation to how the men of the Brotherhood Without Banners have abandoned the Seven and followed R'hllor, the Lord of Light.
People say, well, why are the Brotherhood Without Banners abandoning their own religion that they were raised with, the Seven, to follow Thoros of Myr and the Red Gods? Well, it's partly because they've seen him raise the dead. Not once, but several times. Yeah. That's persuasive. Yeah.
None of the gods have shown any magic powers. The worshippers of those gods have shown powers. So where does this magic come from? And why are different kinds of magic associated with different religions? To figure out what's happening with magic, let's look at where the idea that magic comes from the gods breaks down. First, let's look at Theon Greyjoy. Theon hasn't displayed any magical abilities in the show, and the magical elements of his arc have been downplayed. But back when he conquered Winterfell, he had a dream that foretold the outcome of the Red Wedding. That night, he dreamed of the feast Ned Stark had thrown when King Robert came to Winterfell. The hall rang with music and laughter, though the cold winds were rising outside. At first it was all wine and roast meat, and Theon was making japes and eyeing the serving girls and having himself a fine time, until he noticed that the room was growing darker. The music did not seem so jolly then. He heard the discords and the strange silences, the notes that hung in the air, bleeding. Suddenly, wine turned bitter in his mouth, and when he looked up from his cup, he saw that he was dining with the dead. The text goes on to describe many of the dead Stark bannermen Theon grew up with, as well as Ned, Robert, Lyanna, Brandon, and Lord Rickard, and ends with King Robb joining the Feast of the Dead. And then the tall doors opened with a crash, and a freezing gale blew down the hall, and Robb came walking in out of the night. Grey Wind stalked beside, eyes burning, and man and wolf alike bled from 100 savage wounds. Such a feast is brought up in the next book in a conversation between Jon Snow and Samwell Tarly. I don't even dream of ghosts anymore. All my dreams are of the crypts, of the stone kings on their thrones. Sometimes I hear Robb's voice, and my father's, as if they were at a feast. But there's a wall between us, and I know that no place has been set for me. And Samwell thinks, the living have no place at the feast of the dead. Another instance in which Theon exhibits powers is his transformation from Ramsay Snow's Reek back to Theon Greyjoy. In the show, Reek snaps into action to save Sansa from Miranda. In the books, this process involves magic. The leaves of the heart tree were rustling his name. Theon, they seemed to whisper. Theon. The old gods, he thought. They know me. They know my name. I was Theon of House Greyjoy. I was a ward of Eddard Stark, a friend and brother to his children. A leaf drifted down from above, brushed his brow and landed in the pool. It floated on the water, red, 5-fingered, like a bloody hand. Bran, the tree murmured. They know. The gods know. They saw what I did. and for one strange moment it seemed as if it were Bran's face carved into the pale trunk of the weirwood, staring down at him, with eyes red and wise and sad. Bran's ghost, he thought, but that was madness. This parallels a Jon Snow dream 2 books before, where Jon sees a weirwood tree whose face is Bran's face with 3 eyes. Jon! The call came from behind him, softer than a whisper, but strong too. Can a shout be silent? He turned his head, searching for his brother, for a glimpse of the lean gray shape moving beneath the trees. But there was nothing, only a weirwood. The prophetic dream and the weirwood stuff I'll talk more about in another video, but for now remember that Theon is a worshipper of the drowned god. But his magical abilities seem to focus around the old gods, which refutes the idea that magic comes from the gods people worship, as gods he doesn't worship seem to be giving him powers. Theon isn't the only mismatched character either. Patchface miraculously survives the shipwreck that killed King Robert, Stannis, and Renly's parents. He should have drowned, but instead he washed ashore with prophetic abilities. Davos miraculously survives the Battle of the Blackwater. He is the sole survivor of Tyrion's trap, as everyone else was burned or drowned. He should have drowned, but also washed up ashore. Both are worshippers of the Seven, and Davos even credits his survival to the Mother. But their miracles resemble a different religion entirely, the religion of the drowned god. The religion of the Ironborn revolves around the idea of everlasting life through drowning, and their baptism-like ritual involves drowning people and reviving them. Aeron Greyjoy, known as the Damphair, drowned twice and miraculously washed ashore just as Davos and Patchface did. The pattern with magic in A Song of Ice and Fire doesn't coincide with religion, but with location. Theon demonstrates abilities associated with the old gods as he lives in the north. Seafarers Davos and Patchface undergo the miracles of the drowned god. That cycle of death and resurrection is a staple of water-based magics, as seen in the Shrouded Lord and the Stone Men, and the White Walkers and their whites. The fire magic of the old Valyrians mirrors that of the religion that now dominates much of their old empire, the religion of R'hllor, the Lord of Light. So different locations seem to be linked with different kinds of magic, not different religions. Why that is, I can't say. But now we must answer the question, where does magic come from? The rebirth of the dragons seemed to enhance all magic without exception, which suggests a commonality in the sources of these seemingly different kinds of magic. This may seem like a daunting task, but all the magic we can explain has exactly one source. Daenerys gives birth to her dragons by using her husband, Drogo, and the witch Mirri Maz Duur as blood sacrifices. The prophesied hero Azor Ahai was able to forge Lightbringer and defeat the others by using his wife Nissa Nissa as a blood sacrifice. Similarly, Qohorik smiths, the only smiths that can reforge Valyrian steel, use blood sacrifices to create their weapons, which almost certainly means that the secret to creating Valyrian steel and reforging it involves blood sacrifice. White Walkers have to kill people, essentially blood sacrifice, before they can take them over. The Faceless Men are a magical cult that worships death, so everything they do is blood sacrifice. Prince Garren of the Rhoynar likely created grayscale through the blood sacrifice of the Valyrians and their dragons. Melisandre's sacrifice of Shireen is clearly a blood sacrifice, but to a lesser extent, so is her birthing of a shadow with Stannis to kill Renly, as it needed his blood. Or burning the leeches she used on Gendry to kill Joffrey, Robb, and Balon Greyjoy. Maggie the Frog needs a drop of blood before she can give Cersei her prophecies. The resurrection of Aeron Greyjoy, the Damphair, during the Greyjoy Rebellion, of Davos Seaworth at the Blackwater, and Patchface all followed the sacrifices of lots of people. The resurrection of Drogo needed the sacrifice of Rhaego. Even theories like Jojen Pace theory acknowledge the need of blood sacrifice in magic. The Jojen Pace theory states that Bran enhances his magical abilities by unknowingly eating a paste made of his friend and guide, Jojen Reed. Altek Shift's video on the theory points out that cannibalism is a major theme of Bran's storyline, and as disturbing as it is, could likely be true. My own Dragon Rider theory suggests that Mokoro, a red priest traveling with the Ironborn, will use Victarion Greyjoy as a blood sacrifice to gain Tyrion a dragon. Westeros History's Religion and Magic Weirwood video points out that the ability for certain families in Westeros to maintain a distinctive appearance over time is strongly associated with the existence of a weirwood heart tree in their castle. This is significant because we know weirwood trees are watered with blood. Davos is told by Ser Bartimaeus that Ice Eyes, a king in the north named Brandon Stark, hung his enemy's entrails in a tree as a sacrifice to the old gods. We are told in the World of Ice and Fire that the Ironborn once worshipped a pale demon tree which fed on human flesh until the Grey King cut it down. Bran sees a blood sacrifice in the Dance of Dragons, and as the weirwood tree, he tastes the blood. We even see some of this blood sacrifice to the weirwoods in A Game of Thrones. Ned Stark cleans the blood of his blade at the weirwood tree, a practice he likely learned from his father, who probably learned it from his father before him, dating back to the times Bran saw where people were outright sacrificed at the weirwood tree. Only death can pay for life. Blood for fire, fire for blood. So the source of magic in George R. R. Martin's universe appears to be blood sacrifice, and sacrifices at different locations seem to yield different kinds of magic. But there is one more question we must look at, and that is whether or not there is any significance to King's Blood, which is the next Game of Thrones video I plan on making. Like, comment, subscribe, share, check out my other videos, and come back for Magic Part 3.